I spoke before about a biblical view of fear, and today's lesson is more about a misuse of fear. I'd said the title of the lesson was going to be fear, but I think fear-mongering would be a more accurate title. Recently, I was reading a book that discussed the issue of fear-mongering. Fear-mongering is the spreading of frightening and exaggerated rumors of an impending danger to purposely arouse fear in order to manipulate the public. We have a strong an impulse to pay attention to danger, and fearmongers use this impulse to manipulate people for their own ends. An iconic example of fear-mongering in American politics is the Daisy television commercial from 1964. The advertisement was used by Lyndon Johnson's 1964 presidential run. It begins with a 3-year-old girl standing in a meadow with chirping birds, picking the petals of a daisy while counting each petal slowly. And I'll add, she's 3 years old, so the counting is not exactly accurate. When she reaches the number 9, an ominous sounding male voice is then heard counting down a missile launch. And as the girl's eyes towards something she sees in the sky, the camera zooms in until her pupils fill the screen, blacking it out. When the countdown reaches 0, the blackness is replaced by the flash and mushroom cloud of a nuclear explosion. As the firestorm rages, there is a voiceover by President Johnson. These are the stakes: to make a world in which all of God's children can live, to go into the dark. We must love each other or die. Another voiceover then says, vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high to stay home. Fearmongers prey upon our basic insecurities and vulnerabilities. For example, the fear of being rejected or anxiety about the future. In a way, fearmongers are salespeople selling a solution to the fear they're spreading. Fear sells is understood by many advertisers. Sometimes they're literally selling something: a car with airbags, disinfectant cleaning products, a book about the Middle East, a template how to survive a Russian invasion. But fear-mongering is not only a tactic used in politics, but also in religious circles, where fear can be manipulated and resulting in a type of anxious spirituality. This type is the fear that we often see in polytheistic religion. People live in fear. The purpose of religion is to appease an angry God. Sacrifices or religious ceremonies keep the gods from harming us. And fear can be a danger when it's not obviously manipulative. There's a hazard for anyone writing a book, preaching a sermon, or teaching a lesson. We often use the first part of a book, sermon, or lesson to describe a problem, and then the second part outlining the solution. It's easy to fall into the trap of overstating the problem to lend strength to the proposed solution. We use fear of the bad to encourage acceptance of whatever we think is the solution. Fear shows up very early in the human story. In Genesis chapter 3, beginning in verse 9, we read, "The Lord called to the man and said, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked and I hid myself.'" I don't think it's a coincidence that we first see fear in connection to the fall. Fear is a direct consequence of the fall, a direct consequence of sin. The Hebrew word afraid is used in Genesis 3 is used 402 times in the Old Testament in 373 verses. Don't worry, Cordelia, I will not read all of the passages, but I will give a few examples. In Genesis 18, when the Lord told Abraham that he would have a son, beginning in verse 13, the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Indeed, shall I bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son.' But Sarah denied, saying, 'I did not laugh, for she was afraid.' He said, 'Oh yes, you did laugh.'" Or Genesis 43, where Joseph's brothers came to Egypt for a second time, beginning in verse 61. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into my house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph asked, and then brought the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, "It's because of the money replaced in our sacks the first time that we have been brought in, so that he may have an opportunity to fall upon us and make slaves of us and take our donkeys." And in Ruth chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz says to Ruth, "And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. For I will do for you all that you ask, for the assembly of the people know that you are a worthy woman." And one final example from the first chapter of Daniel. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine, so he asked the palace master to allow him to not defile himself. Now God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to David, "I am afraid of my lord and king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you are in poorer condition than the other young men of your age, I would endanger my own head with the king." Taking advantage of cultural and political conflict, fearmongers vilify others and pass judgment to anyone willing to listen. Fear smothers to hope to death and torpedoes our decision-making ability. In Numbers 13, beginning in verse 3, we read, "The Lord said to Moses, send the men out to spy the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites, and from each of their ancestral tribes you will send a man, every one, a leader among them." So Moses sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, according to the commandment of the Lord, all of them leading men among the Israelites. And dropping down to 25, then we read the report of the 10 spies. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word with them to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. They said, "When we came to the land which you sent it, it flows with milk and honey and its fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea along the Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go at once and occupy it, for we will be able to overcome it." Then the man who'd gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against these people, for they're stronger than we." So they brought the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they spied out, saying, "The land we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw it were of great size. And then we saw the Nephilim, the Ananoks are come from the Nephilim, and ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Then the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the Israelites complained to Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to him, "Would that we had died in Egypt, or that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and little ones will become booty, and would not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" So they said one to another, "Let's choose a captain and go back to Egypt." And then the Lord says in Numbers 14, beginning in verse 22, "None of the people who have seen my glory and the signs that I did in Egypt in the wilderness, and yet have tested me these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land which I swore to give to their ancestors. None of those who despise me shall see it." In much the same way the 10 fearful spies ruined God's plan for the Israelites to inherit the promised land, we often, because of fear, squander our chances to bravely trust in God's goodness. For example, we're fear that immigrants are terrorists, criminals, violent radicals, drug dealers, rapists, and a drain on our economy trigger worries and corrupt hope. Outsiders are stereotyped as less than human rather than people who are created in the image of God. Fear always imagines that which will go wrong instead of that which will go right. Fearmongers claim to be the sole proprietors of deliverance, and those who do not abide by their redemption are fated to suffer the wrath of God. Although they spread fear everywhere, they claim the salvation can only be found in a select few. Within these strict and uncompromising environments, faith is simply a form of religious indoctrination. The solution is more often a narrow belief, uncompromising in nature and exclusive in hope and scope. A fear-mongering faith is draining, one that saps us of hope and inspiration. To combat this, we should regularly assess whether our spirituality is fueled by an optimism in God or overwhelming fear. Contrast the message of the fearmongers to Jesus, who tells us to take courage, that is, not to be afraid. John 16:29 through 33 is one of my favorite passages. His disciple says, "Yes, now you're speaking faintly, not plainly, not in any figure of speech. For now we know you know all things and do not need to have anyone question you. By this we believe that you came from God." Jesus said to them, "Do you now believe? The hour is coming, indeed it is come, when you'll be scattered, each to his home, and you'll leave me alone. Yet I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. I have said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you face persecution, but take courage. I have overcome the world." The phrase Jesus was recorded saying here, this word, is translated "take courage" 6 times in the Gospels. It's also translated "take heart," "be of good cheer," "be of good comfort." In short, do not fear. Paul tells us in Philippians 4, verse 6, "Have no anxiety about anything, but in everything by fear and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." The word that Paul uses for anxiety is used 17 times and 20 times in 17 verses in the New Testament. For example, in Matthew 6:25, Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or not about your body or what you'll put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" One definition of anxiety is a pathological state characterized by an inappropriate or excessive apprehension or fear. In more common usage, anxiety is said to be worry about the future or worry about an uncertain outcome. Again, in short, fear. In other words, the Lord's admonition is not to fear. One author has said, "For all the unintended consequences of some expressions of Christian religion, I think that fear is the most devastating, because fear has a way of permeating all areas of our lives. A faith rooted in fear of God will bring death to places inside us that we didn't even know could die." One reason fearmongering is not Christian is that Christian faith is based upon truth, and fearmongers do not spread truth, but exaggerated rumors. We should not engage in fear-mongering, but neither should we Christians fall victim to those who would sell us fear to manipulate us. And we have the ultimate antidote to fear, because we know that Jesus has already overcome the world. Now, Chris, it's time for our discussion.
All right, so thank you, Myron. In terms of talking about fear, what are some areas that you see affecting you uh, where fear is irrational fear based upon things that are exaggerated? Do you see impacting your life? Myron mentioned a few, but I thought it might be a good place to start if you got any you'd like to share.
Well, for me right now, one of the biggest places that I'm seeing fear mongering or uh, the spread of fear is politics. Both sides are trying to make us afraid to vote for the other side,
Mm-hmm.
and it is affecting me. I am seeing the negatives of both sides, and some of it is scary.
Thanks, Jacob.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say just what Jacob said. I think I told you this before, Chris, when we talked. I fear that even after the election, I'm afraid of the results of the election, whether it's Trump or Biden. there very well may be a civil war. I just fear it. Like I fear a civil war, maybe just a huge rumble between the parties.
And probably not surprisingly, that had a lot to do with my choice of topic today. So
I think we are tempted to use fear to control others or to have power. So I mean, yeah, that goes in that direction, politics, but also in our daily life. I mean, I've been in fear to lose my job, and so that's a good control mechanism. Well, if you don't perform right, then you just lose your job, and or I'm yeah. We also parent sometimes with fear. If you don't if you don't do X, then Y happens, or if you don't do right, then you will lose my love. I mean, I don't think we do that consciously because we don't want to. If we talk about it, it sounds horrible, but I think we do that, or in relationships, even in marriages. Uh, yeah, I think we use that a lot to manipulate and to get what we want, or to yeah, sometimes even, and that again, fearmonger. We want to have a good result for our children, but using that method is probably not the right one to get them there.
I would also like to say, after hearing the term fearmonger and understanding what it really is, I feel a little guilty because although I try like use it as a conversion method, I don't really mean to. But I don't. And it comes from the scripture that says, you know, what is the purpose of gaining the whole world but losing your own soul? I don't know if I'm a fearmonger or I'm just stressing a point to people that there is such thing as a hell, and I fear for it. And sometimes I might blow up the actual literally what hell is like, you know, just to try to help them understand that there is a danger. And maybe I would like to ask the prayers of the congregation to help me do so in love instead of fear of hell. And also, I will admit, at times I am deeply afraid of hell to myself, even though I've been redeemed.
I think there are many things we're bringing up that we can see fear and fear mongering in many areas of our lives, from politics to religion, family, siblings, relationships at work, many different areas. We see fear can be used very inappropriately to distort, to manipulate, to create a defined behavior. But as we work through these things, and as Myron presented a few, when they work through, eventually they end up no longer being effective. Just like if you only worship God because you're scared of hell, eventually that's probably going to fall through. However, I want to transition here to a different question. Is there anything we should fear? Which is a little contrast. Myron was talking about fear mongering, and that's this is the manipulative use of fear, and that's a problem.
And also the definition, exaggerating, an exaggerated presentation of fear.
Exactly. And so to make sure we don't completely acknowledge everything that has anything to do with fear as evil, what should we fear, or is there anything we should fear?
Yes, it goes back to politics. We at the same time should have a healthy fear, because the Bible tells us that if we do wrong, we should be terrified of the punishment that the government could pull down upon us.
There's a scripture that refers to a kind of a healthy fear of those in power. Yes.
One of the things,
there's one real clear scripture. Go ahead, Dad.
One other thing I see is, if we go back to Mark 5, where this lady who touches Jesus' edge of him, and then she's afraid and she responds, this intimacy with God, I think, is most important. She knew that she received power and she's thankful for it, and God allows her. And God knows what's going on, but we don't. And we have to keep that in the equation of whatever we carry in our head.
So most passages in scriptures, when they talk about fear, are saying, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear, be courageous, be courageous. These are the messages that keep coming out through scriptures. Yet there's one that says, fear this. What is that we're supposed to fear?
He who can destroy body and soul.
There you go. So we have a clearer message in scriptures from Proverbs states it many times and in many other passages to fear God, who can destroy both body and soul. How do we, well, I guess there's another passage I'll throw out too. James, it says, the devil prowls like a lion seeking whom he may devour. That is, if you took it out of context, you could call that fear-mongering speech. But the reality is it's not exaggerating the truth. It's the reality. And there is a strong need for fear there. And so we're told to flee from Satan and draw near to God. And I think what I want you to maybe comment on or think about is when the nature of fear, godly fear, interacts with your life, it shapes the way all other fears play out. And I'll throw one example. Of course, Cordelia already brought it up, but Cordelia said, if my boss is, using fear to make me do certain things or to control my job, saying you'll lose the job if you don't do X, Y, or Z, fearing God removes that fear of work, because you know that I will do what's right to honor God regardless, because then in the end, if I lose my job, God is the one who provides for me. He's promised to provide for me. So I don't actually have to fear my job anymore. I still have to do the right things because I fear God. But you have this nice balance and tendency. So how should fear, godly fear, help us address ungodly fear? Or maybe some other scenarios or examples where, like I just gave one, what's another area where we could allow a godly fear to help us properly represent a situation?
I guess it's knowing also God, ultimately that God is in charge. I mean, the passage that I read today of Jesus saying, in the world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I also reminded of the passage in Revelation where the saints are under the altar, the martyrs crying out, "How long?" And God assures them that He will prevail. So the enemies of God should fear.
Absolutely.
Joseph didn't fear his brothers, but he trusted in God. They took his coat off, the one with the amazing colors, because his parents loved Joseph more than his brothers, and the brothers feared that he was getting all the attention. But with Joseph, he reigned Egypt. He was king over Egypt, and his brothers came to him, and he gave them some supplies, some food. That's all I wanted to mention.
So I think one of the examples between those two scenarios you give, John, is when he's in Potiphar's house. He has lots of reasons he could argue to be fearful, yet when Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him, he stands up against her, even though it could cost him his life. That's one of those examples where he chose to fear God over fearing the repercussions of man.
I think,
yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's very difficult to overcome fear when you're physically threatened. For example, a woman who is treated by her husband. What do you do? she, yes, you can say like also in Joseph's example, yeah, he did the right thing even though his life was in danger, and at the end God revealed himself. But I think it's very, very difficult if you're in a situation, abusive situation, for example, where your life is threatened, or if you're in a country where you're uh, where there's war and starvation and everything, and you and your family are really threatened to be killed. How do you deal with that? I mean, yes, trusting in God is the ultimate solution, but I think that is really difficult.
Have
Thanks.
one thing I'll add to that, Cordelia. There's what's amazing looking through history is because you speak of this just fundamental challenge. How do I, when I'm helpless, when I'm at a loss for control, I have no hope inside my own control to find release. How do I make it through that? And yet we've got like the Voice of the Martyrs and another great one from I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a couple series where it talks about various Christians throughout history that have been helpless, that have been under oppression of various forms, and have still prayed for wisdom, leaned upon the Lord, and in these many cases, they often have died in that. There's plenty of other examples outside the Voice of the Martyrs and these types of examples where that has been a convicting point for bringing husbands to the Lord, bringing accusers to the Lord. We see both sides, and it's very hard. Yet, when you see it and you hear a person actually walk in faith and fearing God, it's overwhelmingly encouraging, and it's amazing because these people don't see the home they have here as everything, but they see the home in heaven as everything, and they walk by faith with an eyes on heaven, and it allows them to make these decisions that just don't make sense from a worldly standpoint, but that they're incredibly hard to make. Absolutely. And I think that's what you're bringing out, Cordelia, and it's very true. And it's why it's good to wrestle with this, because this is where our faith, or where the rubber meets the road. It's where our faith is tested, sometimes in subtle cases, sometimes in very stark ones where there is only one hope. And if we don't see it, we're utterly exposed. Carmen, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think I should bring this up because I struggle with anxiety and fear all the time, and I vow to change that for God, because in the book of Revelations, when I give you a list of the lifestyles that people live that will end up in the lake of fire, one of them happens to be cowardness. And also in some versions of the Bible it say the fearful, and I recognize myself as someone who is fearful of, like I was telling you, I sometimes fear going to hell or this or that, and it sometimes gets in the way of me doing the right thing. But at the same time, I've been working on this for a couple of years now, and I feel like I am getting stronger.
Yeah. So Hebrews, like I think 3 and 4, somewhere in that range, talks about the heart of fear ultimately being the fear of death, and how that so often drives our decisions and our reasoning. Yet the thing that makes us Christians is also the thing that takes away that fear of death.
Yeah, and
Yeah, we often.
Sorry.
It's just hard. It's hard to live that way. So yeah, this is the challenge. So, but yeah, that's it's real, and it's what we have to continue to encourage one another in.
And one of the things I do to overcome it is I think of Jesus in Gethsemane, because he was afraid, but still he went to the cross still because he loved us, which shows that perfect love cast out fear.
We're going to be caught up in the air someday, and that we're supposed to encourage one another with these words.
Yes. Good add, John.
I have another thought, if I may. Fear is also given to us for good reasons, for self-preservation, for example. Uh, and I think it's a very fine line, because if my life is in danger, there is a lion in front of me, or a bear in the wilderness, and I'm afraid, I'm running. I'm not standing there and thinking, God will help me. I mean, and also in life, if I'm in an abusive relationship, I think I fear my life, or my children's life. Or I think that is also given for me to do the right thing, to get out of that situation, to seek help. I think we don't have to endure everything, and fear also steers us in the right direction to do the right things and to preserve our life, and within the legal system, and within the right things. So I don't think in every situation, if we're in fear, or for example, if we have fear and anxiety, there's also, if it's more than normal, if there is an illness behind it or something, we can seek treatment. We can seek people who help us to deal with it. So I think sometimes fear is also something where our body tells us, okay, we have to find help in a certain way. Or
Yeah,
where we find God.
I was talking about a misuse of fear, and there definitely is a healthy fear, and it is. I mean, we see examples in Scripture where people taking advantage of whatever they had. I mean, think of Paul. There were times we see he takes advantage of the fact that he was a Roman citizen to avoid. He didn't just accept being abused or beaten or whatever. He pointed out he was a citizen, and they shouldn't do that.
Any other comments on the lesson? Good conversation so far.
Yeah, thanks for participating in the discussion. It's nice to know when you present a lesson that there is some thought going on by what you've presented.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. We'll move over and to a song. Once again, mute your lines as we sing.